It is frightening when you hear of cases where people impersonate a police officer, because it challenges everything that is drilled into most of our minds as we go through our formative years. That being that we should always trust the police, and we should defer to their authority. Obviously, we live in a world where many people question that now to begin with, because, as I've said on the show in the past, there are certainly bad police workers, just as there are bad people in every employ across the world. This week we're going to look at a case where a man clearly lied about being a police officer and clearly made many threats against teenagers in his neighborhood before he would finally follow through on those threats and take the lives of two young men before very clearly trying to cover up all of his crimes. Hello, my name is Lance, and welcome to episode 165 of GBNF. The Murder of Satori Williams and Timmee Jackson. On December 18th of 2015, the police in Indianapolis, Indiana were contacted by a man named Kevin Watkins after his home was broken into and he was robbed. Watkins reported to police that he had had 4 guns stolen from his home, as well as a television. He told police that he believed that 2 kids in his neighborhood had committed the break-in and robbery, but he did not tell the police the names of the kids that he was pointing the finger at. Watkins had issues with some of the teenagers in the neighborhood in the past, and so it was deemed that the alleged break-and-enter and thefts may have been retaliation for the way that he had spoken to and dealt with some of the teens previously. Unsatisfied with the way that the police handled the situation, Watkins took things into his own hands, and 2 days after the burglary, he confronted another of the teenage boys in the neighborhood at his home. That teenager is shown in court documents as only XT, so to protect his identity. XT's mentor, Lonzell Ratcliffe, would also later testify that the confrontation did take place at XT's home, and Watkins had taken it upon himself, dressed in a uniform and wearing a badge, and carrying a weapon, to impersonate a police officer, and allegedly he told XT that he was an officer looking into the break-in and burglary. Ratcliffe would say that when he arrived at the home, he found XT had actually been handcuffed by Watkins, and Ratcliffe said that he asked Watkins who he was, and Watkins said that he was an officer. Ratcliffe believed him at first because of his outfit and weapon. Watkins would later admit, though, that he was not a police officer, but in fact was a bondsman, and he told XT that if his property was not returned, there would be a bloodbath on Christmas. Watkins then took XT out of the handcuffs and left his home. Around that same time, Watkins also confronted the girlfriend of one of the 2 teenagers that he believed were the culprits of the crimes, and he threatened her and said that if his things were not returned, he again made the specific threat that there would be a bloodbath on Christmas or Christmas Eve. It seemed like Watkins had a pretty good idea of who had broken into his home, at least in his own mind, and he didn't care whether he was right or not. He was making it known that there would be a turf war, so to speak, if the wrongs that were committed against him were not righted. On December 22nd of 2015, 4 days after the burglary, Watkins heard that there had been an armed robbery committed at a fast food restaurant that was located near his home and that his daughter worked at. So he believed this was more retaliation against him. Even though he was not a police officer, he took it upon himself to go to the restaurant and attempt to interject himself into the robbery and into the investigation because he believed that the guns had been used that had been stolen from his home in the robbery. And he also believed that the robbery had been committed by the same teens that he suspected had broken into his home. He tried to get the fast food restaurant or the police to allow him to see the surveillance footage of the armed robbery so that he could help police and determine if it was likely the same teens that had robbed him. Aside from those instances, nothing else seemed to take place in terms of the police getting any closer to solving the burglary at Watkins' home, nor Watkins doing anything more to inject himself into the lives of the teenagers in the neighborhood. Seemingly, the teens believed that Watkins had decided to stand down, or at least leave them alone for the time being. But the truth was that Watkins had not been making blank threats when he said that he expected to have his things returned, and when he threatened that there would be hell to pay on Christmas Eve if his things were not returned. On Christmas Eve, Satori Williams and Timmee Jackson were supposed to go to their friend's home to party and to celebrate the holidays, but people started to get worried when the boys did not make it to the home. Friends called friends, and eventually the families of Satori and Timmee were contacted, and everyone tried to locate the two boys, calling their cell phones and looking for them in places that they would usually be found. The neighborhood was skimmed, and there was no sign of the two teenagers. Friends and family started to retrace the steps that the boys would have taken on their route from their home to their friend's home, and it would be Satori's mom and sister who would pass by the home of Kevin Watkins because his home was directly along the route to the home that they were headed to, and the boys were known to sometimes take a shortcut through his yard to get to that friend's house. Satori's mom actually went up to the home and had a conversation with Watkins' wife, who told her that she nor her husband had seen or heard anything of the two boys that were missing. Satori's mom said that at the time she did not see Kevin at the home, nor speak to him, but she also noted that his Chevrolet Suburban was also not at the property at the time that she stopped by. Satori's mom would say that there was something suspicious about her interaction with Watkins' wife, and that she couldn't quite shake it. And so, the next morning when the search continued, she returned to the Watkins home again, retracing steps with her daughter. This time, when the two attended to the home, they noted that Kevin's Suburban was in the driveway, and they saw him outside of the home. This time it would be Satori's sister who would ask Watkins where her brother was. Watkins responded by telling her that he had never seen nor met her brother Satori. He did, though, continue on with his personal vendetta, again voicing the fact that his home had been burglarized and telling Satori's family that the neighborhood teenagers were in trouble. While Watkins was speaking to Satori's mother and sister, though, they noticed some things were awry. They noticed that the Watkins yard was covered in a large amount of blood. The blood was on the grass, the blood was on the leaves, and the blood was on the sidewalk of the home. When Satori's mom asked Watkins about all of the blood, he told her that it must belong to a wild animal, and that a couple of wild animals must have found themselves on his property the night before and had some kind of fight. As you can imagine, Satori's mom astutely did not accept that explanation, and she actually picked up a leaf that was covered in blood, placed it in a plastic bag, and immediately called the police when she left, reported her son Satori as missing, and told the police that she had picked up a bloody leaf from outside of the Watkins home. The police did not take long to react, and they went to Satori's mom's home that morning, and she showed the attending officer the bloody leaf that she had taken from the front yard, and the officer immediately went to Watkins' home to follow up. And when he arrived there, he found Watkins outside of the home, as you can expect, with a cleaning bucket. And he noted that there was still blood on the leaves in the yard, there was still blood on the porch, the door frame to the house had blood on it, and there was a very strong smell of bleach emanating from all around where Watkins was cleaning. The officer immediately called for backup, and more officers quickly attended to the home. When the other officers attended and they started to observe the scene, they noticed that there were drag marks in the leaves and a trail of blood that led from the front door of the house to the backyard, and then the trail moved on to a home next door that was abandoned. While speaking to Watkins, they learned that he owned a bail bond business that was located in a strip mall in town, and they went there, and while searching, they came across a dumpster in behind the business, and within they found a 4.5 millimeter caliber black BB gun, a red and black flannel shirt, a pair of dark jeans, and a pair of shoes that they would later confirm were the same size shoes that Watkins wore. The jeans and the shoes were completely covered in blood and mud. Police were able to obtain surveillance footage from businesses close to the bail bond location, and that footage did show that Watkins' Suburban was in the area driving into his business parking lot at roughly 8:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve, and then again on Christmas Day at 3:45 a.m. Kevin was seen carrying a shovel, changing his clothes, and putting the items into the dumpster that the police had found there while investigating. Police then obtained a search warrant for inside of Watkins' business, and they found blood inside of the building there as well. When police searched the Suburban, they found that the carpet in the back of the SUV was stained with blood. They also found a bottle of bleach next to a large garbage bag, which was stuffed full of blood-stained leaves, the packaging for a tactical tomahawk, a bone chip, brain matter, and a severed finger. The bag also contained clothing that matched the clothing that Satori and Timmee had been wearing on Christmas Eve before they had gone missing. Satori's sweatshirt and t-shirt had been slashed in the back and shoulder, and those were deemed to have come from a sharp-edged object. The blood that was found at Watkins' home, the blood that was found on the clothing in the dumpster at his work, and the blood inside of his bail bond business were all found to be a match to the DNA of Satori Williams and Timmee Jackson. The bone chip inside of the SUV was determined to have been a piece of the skull of one of the boys, and the severed finger belonged to Satori Williams. As you can imagine, with the evidence that was quickly building against Watkins, it didn't take long for him to be arrested for the murders of Timmee and Satori. He was arrested 2 days after the murder on December 26th of 2015, and a man who seemed to, frankly, not be very intelligent or an intelligent killer seemingly knew the jig was up, and immediately he started talking. After he was picked up and while he was being transported for questioning, he spoke to the arresting officers and said, quote, "Those kids were a bunch of gangsters. I knew I should have left them alone. Now I'm going to jail." Unquote. Watkins would be charged with 2 counts of murder. Even though it seemed incredibly obvious that Watkins was the man that was behind the murders of these 2 young teens, and even he had admitted it, he didn't talk. He didn't help with the investigation, and he didn't help to find the bodies of the 2 young boys whose lives he had taken. He seemingly had no interest at all in helping bring any sort of closure to the case or to the families of Timmee and Satori. Mercifully, the bodies would eventually be found, though. It was nearly 2 months after the murders when on February 22nd of 2016, a fisherman was fishing in a retention pond that was located close to Watkins' bail bond business, and he came across the body of Timmee Jackson in a shallow grave. Investigators swarmed the area and skimmed, looking for any evidence, and they found a tomahawk at the bottom of the retention pond. That tomahawk, you guessed it, it matched the packaging that they had found inside of Watkins's truck 2 months earlier. Nearly 2 months after that, on April 10th of 2016, the body of Satori Williams was found buried in a shallow grave as well, in a field in Shelby County, which is approximately 32 miles or 51 kilometers to the southeast of Indianapolis. Investigators now knew where the bodies had been disposed of, and so they were able to finally get their hands on something that they needed more evidence in order to get: a warrant for the cell phone records of Kevin Watkins. When they received those, everything came together, and his cell location data showed that his cell phone had connected to towers near where each of the bodies was discovered on both Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. His cell phone data also showed investigators that he had changed the date on his phone, sometime between 9:22 p.m. and 10:36 p.m. on Christmas Eve, so that his phone recognized that it was December 13th, not December 24th. Folks, as you're listening to this episode, I assure you, for investigations, silly tricks like this that work on cell phone games will not trick the police. When autopsies were completed on the bodies of Timmee and Satori, it was determined that their deaths had been caused by multiple chop wounds to their heads. The injuries to both boys were almost identical, and their injuries were to the sides and backs of their bodies. Neither body had any wounds on the front. The forensic pathologist concluded that both Satori and Timmee were attacked from behind, that both boys sustained more than one blow that would have completely incapacitated them, and that the chop wounds were consistent with the size of the blade of the tactical tomahawk that had been recovered in the retention pond after Timmy's body was found. The case itself seemed pretty locked in. We can only hope and wish that, honestly, every case was this obvious, and that every case was seemingly this easy to piece together. They had all of the evidence that they needed, that was for sure. During pretrial, the state filed notice that they were going to include the evidence of Watkins's interactions with XT that I spoke about earlier, and Watkins tried to object to that testimony, clearly knowing that it showed that the murder was premeditated, which may be the only thing that he could have really fought at trial. We'll get more into the reason that he needed to strike down that evidence in a few minutes, but it will become clear. His objection was overruled, and it was determined that the testimonies of XT and his mentor Lonzel would be allowed in court. The trial would go before the courts between February 26th and March 2nd of 2018, more than 2 years after the murders. The reason that Watkins had tried to object to the testimonies of XT and Lonzel was that his only defense seemingly was that the murders were not premeditated, and in fact, what he presented and testified to at trial was that he did indeed kill Timmee Jackson and Satori Williams, but that he had committed the murders in self-defense. Watkins said that in the days following the burglary at his home, he had become very afraid that his life, his property, and his home were under attack from the teenagers in the neighborhood that he had issues with in the past. He then presented that he was in his front yard on Christmas Eve, and he saw two people running around the corner towards him and his house, and he said that one of the boys had pulled a gun and pointed it directly at him. He said that he reached for the tactical tomahawk that was on his belt, and he attacked the boy who had the gun. He said that the other boy had then tried to grab him to gain control of the situation, and because he feared that the other boy may also have a gun, he started to strike that person with the tomahawk as well. Hawkins testified that he did not see a gun in the hand of the second boy, but that he felt that he had reason to believe that he was armed as well. Watkins said that he did not know how many times he had struck each boy or where he had hit them, and he testified that after he had killed them, he had thought about calling the police but decided against it. Instead, he decided to drag both bodies into his backyard and then to the abandoned home next door, while he decided what to do next, which was ultimately loading the bodies into the back of his vehicle, driving to his business, and eventually burying them where their bodies were discovered. He said that he had thrown the tomahawk into the retention pond and disposed of the items that were found in the dumpster and purchased a new shirt at a nearby gas station. He also said that he had placed all of the items found in the bag into his vehicle there and that he was trying to clean up the crime on Christmas Day when police did arrive at his home. Sometimes I think you have to try to put your best foot forward as a guilty as hell murderer and try to save your skin in any way that you can, which is clearly what Watkins was trying to do here. He admitted to everything except for the fact that the murders were premeditated, and instead he concocted a story that may have saved him from the worst penalty possible and first-degree premeditated murder. However, even to the untrained eye, there are some serious issues here. The fact that he believed that the jury should believe that he was confronted by two men, at least one with a gun, and that he attacked, but they had turned to run from a tomahawk when they had a gun, is frankly silly. It doesn't line up with the injuries, and it doesn't line up with the truth that was proven at trial. Further to that, if you were attacked by two men on your property at your home and you attacked back, I don't think that most sane people would decide against calling the police. It's obvious to me that this was not a very intelligent man. He left evidence everywhere. Heck, he didn't even attempt to clean up the crime scene at his home before Satori's mother came by and saw what she saw. He didn't cover his bases, so I can't help but wonder if he believed that nobody would connect the dots to him at all, or what. Not calling the police regardless of anything proves a significant level of guilt. That much, in my mind, is for sure. Watkins surely knew that there was no way he was ever going to get away with that self-defense argument. He had ran his mouth too many times to too many people, threatening that Christmas Eve and Christmas would be a bloodbath before Christmas Eve became a bloodbath. As I'm sure you can surmise, based on the mountain of evidence against Watkins and the lack of evidence to support his claims of what happened, the jury found Watkins guilty as charged. Watkins' sentencing hearing took place on April 20th, 2018, and he was sentenced to 2 consecutive 55-year terms for a total term of 110 years in prison for the premeditated murders of Timmee Jackson and Satori Williams. Perhaps shockingly, perhaps not, based on the fact that there is little else that he could do, Watkins appealed, basing his appeals on 3 main issues. Watkins appealed that the court erred in admitting evidence about his confrontation with XT. His argument is that the evidence violated the Indiana rules of evidence that state that evidence is not permissible for the sole purpose to prove that a person acted in a certain way in order to prove their later character and later decisions. He believes that evidence led to unfair prejudice. Watkins also appealed that the state had failed to disprove his contention that the attacks and murders were done as an act of self-defense. Watkins contends that the state should have been forced to disprove that he had acted in self-defense. The conundrum for me here, though, would be whether or not he should have had to prove that his actions were in self-defense or not, also, because I don't believe what he did. Simply saying something in court doesn't just mean that it happened. People can say whatever they want, and I think that it's pretty clear that Watkins just riffed with this story and didn't prove it in any way that anything was done in self-defense. Just all of it is utter nonsense in my personal opinion. The third thing that Watkins appealed was that the sentence was inappropriate because of the nature of the offenses, of course, alluding to the fact that they were in self-defense in his mind and his character. Watkins presented that he had lived a relatively stable and productive life professionally and personally before he committed the murders. The courts in the end ruled that his appeals would be denied. They ruled that the testimonies in question were admissible because they served the purpose that Watkins ironically said the state didn't do, of proving that the attacks and murders were premeditated. They also ruled that there was not reasonable doubt to prove that the murders were in self-defense in any way, stating that any reasonable juror could have seen through the statements of Watkins claiming self-defense. Kevin Watkins remains imprisoned with his original sentence at the Indiana State Prison, and his earliest possible release date would be June 24th, 2098. At that time, Kevin would be 130 years old. And so, we come to the close of another case. This one kind of gives a look into the types of crimes that we don't often look at on true crime podcasts. Crimes that are relatively cut and dried and clear-cut from the very beginning. But cases like this can give you a look into still how slow the processes are to get a case before the courts and get a conviction and deal with the appeals that almost inevitably come. Timmee Jackson was remembered by his family, who remember him as a young, excited young man who understood the value of hard work and earning everything that he received in life. He did odd jobs for neighbors and friends of the family in order to make money. He would rake yards, cut grass, wash dishes, and babysit. He was remembered also as a gentle giant, a young man who was quiet and reserved, partially because he struggled with speech issues, but everyone that knew him said that he was a sweet and nice boy. It was said that he would give someone the shirt off his back, even recently before his death, having given his PlayStation away to friends because he said that he wanted them to be happy and that they didn't have anything. He's remembered by his father, Ben White, and his mother, Eileen Jackson, and many more family members and friends. Satori Williams is remembered by friends and family as a blessing to them and the world from the moment he was born. Everyone that knew him said that there was no way he would have been involved in the burglary at Watkins' home. Satori is remembered by his mother, Amber Partlow, and numerous friends and family members. So, when you take a deeper look into the types of appeals that take place, even in cases where it does seem pretty clear what happened, how does it make you feel? Do you think that it's worth the tax dollars and the fight for seemingly every convict to endlessly appeal and tie up the system after they are found guilty, especially in cases like this one where everything seems incredibly obvious? Jump over on socials and let me know what you think. I love interacting with each and every one of you, and you can find the podcast by searching GBNF Pod or GBNF True Crime nearly anywhere. The best place to go, of course, if you want more of the show and closer interaction is, of course, Patreon. On Patreon, you get every episode early and ad-free, you get bonus episodes, and you receive a plethora of perks depending on the tier that you support the show on. And, of course, you get to support the show. Each and every week you come back for more true crime, and very seldom do we miss even 1 week, and we do it all for free. The lights are kept on by the support from you, the fans, for $5 or $10 a month. Thank you to the patrons who are already supporting the show that way, and thank you to each and every one of you who will sign up in the future. There will be more and more things coming down the pipeline over on Patreon. Thank you for tuning in for another episode, and thank you for coming back each and every week. I hope that you and yours are well, that you survived the holidays, and that you're working hard every day to be better. See you back here again next week.